my coffee and today's guest here with me, so we're ready to roll. Welcome to our Circular Coffee Break podcast, where we will be talking about everything circular and beyond. Now, the idea behind the podcast is actually to build a circular economy community to share ideas, insights, experiences that can accelerate the transition towards a sustainably circular world. It's actually great to see that the community is growing and we can add new perspectives with every guest and every episode. But we cannot do this without all of you out there listening. So we're very eager to hear your thoughts, ideas, feedback, questions. Therefore, please leave a comment on our webpage, www.circularcoffeebreak.com, or drop us a note at circularcoffeebreak@gmail.com. We're always eager to hear your thoughts and ideas, so drop us a note. Now, let's get started. My guest today is an ambitious sustainability leader with a heart beating for sustainability, strategy, and customer value. She started off her career at Neste in branding and marketing before transferring into roles in strategy development and sustainable partnerships, where she has been identifying and leading growth opportunities and commercial value creation with sustainability. For those of you not familiar with Neste, Neste is the world's leading producer of sustainable aviation fuel, renewable diesel, and renewable feedstock solutions for various polymers and chemical industry uses. Since June 2023, she is Vice President Sustainability at Outokumpu, the global leader in sustainable stainless steel. Outokumpu's business is based on circular economy, actually, as more than 90% of the production originates from recycled steel, which is then turned into long-lasting, fully recyclable materials. She holds a Master of Science in International Marketing Management and Sustainability from the Lund University. Welcome to the show, Heidi Peltonen.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation.
Great to have you. And you have worked for Neste and now you're working for Outokumpu. So arguably two companies that have sustainability and circularity at the heart of their brand and operations. From your point of view, could you highlight some of the main ingredients or characteristics that make a company a sustainably circular business?
Yes, absolutely. I think that when it comes to circularity, when companies are really able to embed it to the very core of their business, to the very core of their solutions, and basically build value towards their customers by using circular economy as the basis, I think this is what really kind of differentiates the companies that are probably a bit ahead in when it comes to circularity. I think in both of my previous employer as well as the current one have been also able to not only utilize circular economy as the basis of their business, but actually help their customers to further reduce their emissions. And I think this is the very crucial part of when you actually turn all that waste, whether it's for renewable fuels, use cooking oil, or in our case, Outokumpu, utilizing scrap, and you're able to then further help your customers by turning that waste into something valuable. I think this is what is at the very essence of building circular business.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we pressed record, we talked a little about the need to basically create value out of these sustainability and circularity approaches, activities, and initiatives in that context. So I fully agree. It has to be at the core of the company, and it cannot just be an add-on. Otherwise, you will just not get the employees on board in that context.
Exactly. And in Outokumpu's case, circularity and the fact that we are able to use over 90% recycled raw materials, which was when I first heard it, I had never heard of it before. So I think that this is something we also need to speak louder in the future of. But the fact that we are able to use over 90% recycled raw materials, it has also allowed us to drop our emissions down. And we are actually the company that is we have the lowest carbon footprint in the industry currently, and this is heavily relying on circularity. So I think this is where companies can really showcase how circularity can create value to your stakeholders.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, it was very impressive in preparation for today's session. I actually read exactly that. I mean, 90% recycled feedstock. I mean, that's a huge number, and I think it's very far off to the next competitor in that context. And I think it goes beyond that, because I read that Outokumpu is actually committed to reducing direct, indirect, and supply chain emissions by 42% by 2030. And is basically looking at different other sustainability metrics. Now, we all know sustainability goes beyond emissions, and it's a very broad topic. Could you highlight some of the challenges you see in the area of sustainability at Outokumpu today, and how you're addressing those?
Yes, absolutely. And I really agree with you that sustainability is a broad topic. I think we are now after ESG, which is an arguable term in a way, but when that came, I think companies really started working on not only on the climate part or environmental part, but really across the various topics. When it comes to the steel sector, if we start with the climate impact, steel sector itself accounts to 7 to 9% of global emissions. So we have a significant impact to various sectors, to various industries. But at the same time, if we think about green transition, for example, whether it's hydrogen, electric vehicles, renewable energy, all those sectors will need more steel than has been needed in the traditional industries. Yes. So I see that we have a very dual role. We are part of the problem, but at the same time, we have to be the solution as an industry. We have to be able to decarbonize our entire value chain. So I think coming back to the science-based targets that you mentioned that we are committed to, this is, I think, the steel sector will go there. We will have to decarbonize. And if you are a bit ahead of the curve and you're able to support your customers before everyone else is there, I think this is where you can also really build competitive advantage. But then when it comes to, this is very strongly focusing on climate. And I think from our perspective, circularity is one of the key targets. We actually have a target to have over 90% recycled raw material content in our operations. So this is one aspect that is delivering to the SBTi target as well. At the same time, of course, we continuously also look into what kind of low carbon raw materials we can develop together with our suppliers. Stainless steel as a material is a bit different. We can never go fully circular. We will always need, for example, nickel in our production of stainless steel. So it's not just about utilizing scrap or recycled steel as a material. We will always also need to invest and innovate virgin raw materials that have a lower carbon footprint. Then at the same time, we are the biggest single user of electricity in Finland, which was also crazy to hear for the first time. So investing into low carbon electricity and energy in general is one of the key projects that we have ongoing. And when we think about climate impact and reducing emissions, we cannot really exclude biodiversity of that discussion. They are very much interlinked. And at the same time, when we are already today using 94%, has been the average this year, 94% of recycled raw materials, we of course help to also mitigate biodiversity impact through not utilizing so many virgin raw materials. So I think those are, if we look into topic, those are the key sustainability targets that we have today. But we really, if we think about innovating new solutions, climate solutions, it all relies on people. So we cannot make anything happen without having a diverse experience in the organization and inclusive organization culture. And these are also some targets that we set actually during, I think, last or the previous year, to really increase diversity in the organization to be able to fulfill the commitments that we have made. So we really do look across ESG and not only on the climate impact.
Interesting. And there's a couple of topics I think you mentioned that will be really important going forward. You were talking about the recycled raw materials, but also the growing need for stainless steel. So if the demand grows, there will be a fight for recycled materials at some point in time, as more and more companies are basically switching to recycled materials. So what you mentioned about also looking at alternatives for virgin raw materials will be extremely critical. And I think we're seeing that with aluminium, for example, at the moment already, that the market for recycled aluminium is very difficult for a lot of companies because there's just not enough recyclable aluminium in the market to address the demand. In that sense.
Absolutely. I was just going to say that I have heard estimates that by 2080, 2090, we will probably have enough scrap to fulfill the need globally that steel companies have, but there is quite a long way to go until then.
Yeah, absolutely, which leads to a topic of partnerships and basically needing to cooperate along the value chain in both directions, basically with basically customers who are using and then hopefully returning the recyclable material, but also with suppliers. Now, at Neste, you've been the head of sustainable partnerships. And more recently, I noticed that you've also, in your role in Outokumpu, you highlighted the need for partnerships and collaboration across company borders. What do you think is the role, specifically in the context of what we just talked about, of partnerships? But also, how do you make these partnerships work? Because traditionally, companies were very focused on what's happening within the company. And now all of a sudden, you're asking them to cooperate with a very broad ecosystem of partners. So what's your experience there?
Yeah, I think when I started at Neste, it was the first role ever created at Neste, the head of partnership role. And maybe the first time we really started working together with other companies, I heard a lot, and I've heard in many companies a lot of this. Okay, but if we basically start working with another company, how do we ensure that what we want to achieve, what we want to get done is really going? And I think this is where the essence of partnerships comes. It has to be a mutual benefit. It has to be something that drives both of your targets forward. Otherwise, it will always be controversial, so to say. So I think this is one of the very key aspects to creating partnerships, especially in sustainability. At the same time, for example, for Outokumpu, up to 70% of our emissions come from our supply chain. So without partners, we would only achieve 30% of our target, so to say. And I think this is something that there is estimates that every company's supply chain emissions are up to 5 times higher than their direct emissions. And I think up till now, a lot of companies have only focused on their direct impact. But now with corporate sustainability reporting directive, CSRD, which all the sustainability people know well, all these legislations are forcing all of us to really look across the value chain. And I think looking into our supply chain, the partnerships heavily on Outokumpu's side, they rely on how do we find low carbon raw materials, whether it is scrap or something else. And I think this is the very essence of our supply chain strategy. And we talk actually about strengthening our supply chain through partnerships, which also include us acquiring companies and working really strongly together on those innovations. But at the same time, if I think about the demand for green steel in our case, or renewable fuels or whatever solution there is, it is the very end customer who is driving those decisions. As you said before the call, I think that we are also consumers, so we want to have those solutions. And I think for us, it's also a lot about how do we reach through data, through the kind of product qualities or whatever, how do we reach those end customers who can then drive the decision forward across the value chain? Steel producers are very far from the person who actually purchased the washing machine or electric car. Yeah. So how can we demonstrate the value that low carbon steel has all the way to the end customer. So I think in many ways you can do some things in sustainability without partnering, but I think to have as ambitious targets as we have and to achieve those, it's impossible without partnering both with the supply chain, but then also with your customers and customers' customers.
And absolutely. And I think we're talking about the famous scope 3, which I think is causing problems for a lot of companies and a lot of industries these days, because traditionally you had relationships with one or two suppliers down the value chain, or maybe your direct customers, but not beyond that. And now all of a sudden we're talking about end-to-end value chain transparency. We talk about digital passports. We talk about all of these things that expand responsibility, but also the need, as you said, for getting transparency, getting data, getting insights into parts of the value chain that traditionally you haven't really cared about or haven't even been able to look into. So that will be a very interesting path forward for companies to see how to address that.
Absolutely.
Now you mentioned the customers and the distance you have to the end customers. How are you addressing that at Outokumpu? So how are you getting into that conversation into that direction of the value chain?
Yeah, I think one very crucial aspect to this, which I mentioned earlier, is the data. So we launched first in the industry, actually, and now many have followed, product carbon footprint, which basically allows then further our customers to demonstrate the value of, for example, Circle Green, which is our premium product with the lowest carbon footprint. I think at the end of the day, every company is looking for solutions, but they're not looking for the solutions for the sake of technological perspective. They're usually looking for the solution to help them to then further reduce their emissions. And I think without data, without transparent data, no one will ever know what is the actual impact and not able to report on it. So I think this was one of the most crucial aspects, that we are able to, for every single product, we are able to provide product carbon footprint in Europe, and then further we will develop it also in the US, where we are strong. But I think this is what allows to demonstrate the value further to the downstream. It does not probably go yet all the way to the consumer who is making that purchase on washing machine, but I think it's the step towards the right direction. At the same time, we have now started to partner maybe more with well-known brands to really showcase that this is possible. It is possible to already reduce your emissions in stainless steel. And I don't think that there is that many options available currently. So Circle Green, having 93% lower carbon footprint, was the first and is still the lowest that the industry can get to. So I think it's a lot about providing data, providing the insights on what is the actual impact. And I'm hoping that, for example, the digital passport will actually accelerate the requirements to really provide this data. As I think currently it's even the higher emission products are not necessarily that well known, because there is no requirements to really provide the impact. And then at the same time, how do you showcase, how do you communicate the impact? There is a lot of preparation around EU green claims, and I think companies have become really cautious, which is good. You have to talk about the right impact, you have to talk about and show the data. But at the same time, I do think that if we think about green transition, big part of it is also to show that it is possible, to show the actions that companies are making. So hoping that that will still continue despite the increasing regulation around communication and sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we earlier talked about the scope 3 along the value chain. And I think every company will have the same question. So how do I lower emissions? How do I lower impact? And that's not only impact on CO2. You mentioned biodiversity. We will be starting to talk about freshwater and all of many other topics around that. And the same question will be again and again. I can do something within my company, but how do I manage scope 3? How do I manage my suppliers along the way? So it will be, as you said, more and more critical for like the producers of the end products to look deeper and deeper into the value chain and understand where is the stainless steel coming from, where are different components coming from, what is the CO2 footprint of that, because we need to look at the end-to-end impact that a product or a service has, and not only a subset of that. So I fully agree.
Absolutely. And I do believe actually now that data is strongly focused on, let's say, CO2 or emissions, but I do believe that in the future, for example, from our customers' perspective, they're increasingly interested in how do we assess the human rights? How do we ensure the social part? We can talk about green and just transition or whatever term we want to use, but I think that it's very focused on climate, which probably is the first step, and that has the biggest impact. But at the same time, what we work really strongly on is how to verify that our supply chain is sustainable in every aspect. So it's not just about the emissions anymore. It is increasingly also about the human rights and social impact, communities. If we think about the mining as an industry, which is heavily of our supply chain, I think that there we also have to look into sustainability from all the aspects, as well as we do in our direct operations.
Yeah, absolutely. And when talking about sustainability and circularity, we're naturally talking about a systemic change, not just the change of one company or one industry or even one country, but really a systemic change, which is global. How do you see the requirements of cooperation going beyond the value chain with like all the different stakeholders? Because at the end of the day, companies, governments, consumers, employees, investors, and the list goes on, can have a very different perspective and a very different starting point when it comes to sustainability and circularity. How do you see the interaction between those stakeholders and the roles?
Yeah. As I said earlier, I really believe that within companies, it's not linear value chain anymore. It has become very much round, or I don't even know, ecosystem between companies. So we might collaborate with our scrap suppliers and the end customers. We call it inner circle, which is a solution we provide to really utilize the existing infrastructure for collecting scrap and then making something more valuable out of it, so that it does not end up as waste. So within companies, it has become much more like an ecosystem value chain where different players work together across the sectors. But then I think you touch upon a very important point. As I said, steel accounts 79% of global emissions. Hard to abate sector, which includes other industries as well, that's somewhere around 30%. To really decarbonize these sectors, hard to abate sectors, it will require significant investments. And those investments cannot come directly just from companies' pocket. We will need both public and private investments. And I think this is where both the government as well as then private investors come into the play. And that's something that we are also advocating strongly on, that we need to find different ways to finance the decarbonization. And it is a good long-term investment. As I said, the demand for green steel will only increase in the future. But at the same time, we will need to find profitable ways of doing it, because if companies just go bankrupt, that will not solve the crisis, but rather we need to find ways to make it profitable. So both legislation as well as investments play a crucial role in the decarbonization of steel industry. At the same time, of course, the demand from end customers for green steel will also help accelerate the journey, because when we can somehow divide the cost between the entire value chain, it makes more sense for companies to also invest when they see that there is clear demand for green steel.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you pointed out, we have different roles ourselves in this setup. So we are employees, we are decision makers, but we're also investors. We're also part of the political, of the regulatory system, with basically placing our votes. So we have very different leverage points where we are able to influence, but also have a responsibility to influence and set the right frame, exactly as you said, from an investing, from a regulatory, from a company, but also from a consumption point of view in that context.
Absolutely.
Now, COP28, the annual climate meeting of the United Nations that happened very recently, is very fresh in our minds, and a lot has been said and written about it. You were there personally at COP28. Could you give us your perspective on what happened there, on the events, the meetings? You were part of some panels. And last but not least, the outcome of COP28. So how have you perceived the event, the discussions, the things that have been taken forward there in your role, but also personally?
Yeah, absolutely. It was the first time Finland held a pavilion, which I think in many ways was really successful as well. And it was also the first time Outokumpu was invited, and we took part in COP28. We held, of course, in the Finnish pavilion, there were a lot of sessions held by different companies and different players, not only actually companies, also NGOs. Mm-hmm. But from our perspective, we really wanted to highlight the pivotal role that steel industry has in green transition, which I don't think it has been talked about that much before. At least I have not been part of that bubble, but that's the reason why we wanted to go there, to really showcase that there is solutions, and to then further have discussions with customers, with technology providers. And I think something that for me really differs between COP28 and actually any other event is that basically all the players are there. You asked me previously which different roles do governments, investors, consumers have. And I think this is the only event, at least where I've been part of, where all these players are present. Everyone has the same goal. And you can, of course, argue about the end result of the negotiations. You can argue, are we doing enough? But at least to me, the atmosphere and the discussion we had was highly valuable, also driving our strategy forward in sustainability. Our CEO, Heikki Malinen, also took part in the event. And I think this is also really crucial going forward, that companies realize that this is not a sustainability discussion. This is a business discussion. It is a business decision to invest into sustainability and in climate solutions. So I was really happy to see how increasingly important that discussion was, that it really goes to the very core of the business and leadership showing the way. So I think those were, from our perspective, the key findings of us joining. And then if we take a broader perspective on the COP28 negotiations, I remember the second last day before the results came out, I was really, and I'm not a pessimistic person, but I was really thinking that what will be the outcome? And I think many people were. So at the end of the day, the fact that transition away from fossil fuels was mentioned in the final declaration was a positive sign. Finland had the concept of action over words. And I think this very strongly also applies to the final declaration, that it's a really positive sign and, let's say, a right step towards the right direction, that we say transition away from fossil fuels. But at the same time, the actions will show how the impact actually will be. So I think that that's something that many stakeholders were emphasizing, as well as we have, that we really want to see actions. And the final statement was a positive sign, but now it really counts how these will be taken into implementation. And I think here then, governments making the right legislation to support those companies who are doing the actions, and then at the end of the day, consumers being willing to pay for the solutions. I think this is where the collaboration comes into place, that how do we make this transition? How do we triple renewable energy? How do we triple even nuclear energy, which was also one of the highlights from the outcome. So I think the actions depend heavily on the companies who emit and the entire value chain that companies have.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The coffee, unfortunately, is empty, and it's time to wrap up the episode. But maybe one point still. You, in preparation for the session, you said that you had a very good panel discussion at COP28 with the companies like Volvo and Alfa Laval on circularity, specifically emphasizing how the market around waste is developing. So could you highlight some of the points from that discussion and also your perspective from an Outokumpu perspective on how companies can build new business models around circularity in that context? You've been talking about what you're doing at Outokumpu, but also maybe from your broader experience and the discussions you had around this.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a really interesting discussion with both chief sustainability officers from Volvo and Alfa Laval, and we were talking a lot about when waste starts to be valuable. For example, scrap. When it starts to be valuable and companies really need it in order to decarbonize, then the questions arise, such as what will be the best way? Is it that there is local waste systems that the companies are able to use waste locally, or will it be more a global market? And then we start to talk about transporting massive amounts of waste to another country, which of course then generates emissions as well. So I think that the conclusion from the discussion at COP28 was, first of all, that whenever we talk about circular business models, it has to create value, it has to be integrated to the business. I think in Volvo's case, they even emphasized that it has financial benefit for the company to utilize waste as a material or recycled material. And then at the same time, we really want to see a market developing around waste where it is much more about partnerships, integrating to the existing systems instead of creating new ones, and at the same time utilizing waste as close to the operations as possible. So not really creating more emissions by transporting it to other markets, but really highlighting the location, so to say, when it comes to that. And I think I mentioned earlier the inner circle. I think companies can also, it's not just about taking material and turning it into a product. I hope that I see more and more, or we will see more and more, these business models where different players generate value together. And then at the end of the day, again, the cost for decarbonization is divided between companies. So I see a lot of potential, and maybe into looking steel industry as a whole, there is much more potential for different business models and different, let's say, even service solution-based climate products, instead of just looking into the technological product itself and providing that. So there is a lot of potential in my perspective.
And I guess we could have another full episode just on the topic of the potential of circular business models centered around waste or side streams and all of these topics. As mentioned, the coffee is unfortunately empty. Thanks a lot, Heidi, for joining me today. Really interesting topics, really interesting things going on at Outokumpu. And as you mentioned, it was great to see how much is actually already going on around the topic at Outokumpu, and to hear about the topics you're still working on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect. For all you listening out there, we hope you found today's episode interesting and inspiring, and you got some new ideas and snippets. If you like the podcast, you can help us out growing the Circular Coffee Break community by giving us a 5-star rating and a positive review on Apple Podcast and Spotify and whatever other platform you're using. As a new thing now in season 2, we're also present at YouTube and Medium, so go check out our content there. Also, as always, please remember to subscribe to stay in the loop on future episodes that will be dropping every 2 weeks. With that, the only thing left is to thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all here at the Circular Coffee Break podcast.